All right, well, listen, let's just get underway because at 2 p.m. you have another briefing in this room by Ambassador Do Hong Viet, the president of the 11th NPT Review Conference. He will be here to speak to you about the NPT Review Conference and highlighting the events this week. And speaking of which, this morning the Secretary General addressed that very conference, and he said, he told member states that for the first time in decades, the number of nuclear warheads is on the rise and nuclear testing is back on the table. Hard-won norms are eroding arms and are eroding and arms control is dying, Mr. Guterres added. Across the decades, the Secretary General reminded member states that they developed a web of instruments to prevent the use, to prevent the proliferation, and to prevent the testing of nuclear weapons, and to achieve their total elimination. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons is the bedrock of these efforts. The Secretary General called on the countries to keep their promises under the treaty. He also called on them to use a discussion starting to lay the groundwork for the treaty to evolve so that it is able to ensure that until nuclear weapons are eliminated, humanity never cedes control over their use, and that nuclear science and technology can be used to benefit sustainable development. After that, the Secretary General went from the General Assembly to the Security Council, where he, as well as Arsenio Dominguez, the head of the International Maritime Organization, briefed the Security Council on maritime security. The Secretary General warned that merchant shipping is being used as a tool of pressure and that navigational rights and freedoms, bedrock principles of the law of the sea, are being undermined. He said that the Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points, and its blockage has resulted in the worst supply chain disruption since the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Prolonged disruption risks triggering a global food emergency, pushing millions, especially in Africa and South Asia, into hunger and poverty, Mr. Guterres warned. The Secretary General said that the Charter's prohibition on the threat of use of force applies fully at sea. Navigational rights and freedoms of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz must be respected, as affirmed by the Council's 2817 resolution. Mr. Guterres appealed to the parties to open the strait, to let ships pass with no tolls and no discrimination. Let trade resume and let the global economy breathe, he said. Arsenio Dominguez, the IMO Secretary General, said his agency's main concern remains with the safety and well-being of the roughly 20,000 innocent seafarers who are trapped in the Gulf due to this conflict. Following the IMO Council's decision, he's begun to develop an evacuation framework using existing traffic separation schemes to securely evacuate ships and seafarers from the conflict zone, provided it is safe to do so. And we shared both his remarks and the Secretary General's remarks with you. Turning to the situation between Lebanon and Israel, I can tell you that our special coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Plaschert, is currently in Israel. She's conducting meetings with senior Israeli political and security officials, including Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar and Defense Minister Israel Katz. This visit is part of her regular consultations with key interlocutors on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701, while taking into account the recent developments, including the renewal of the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel and the actual situation on the ground. The special coordinator continues to convey a clear message to all sides. The cycles of violence which have devastated lives, devastated homes, and devastated livelihoods in Lebanon and northern Israel must come to an end. The UN, including through her work, continues to explore opportunities to build trust between the parties and consolidate the cessation of hostilities with a view of advancing stability along both sides of the Blue Line. Yesterday, our peacekeepers reported 299 firing incidents originating from south of the Blue Line or within the area of operations of the Israel Defense Forces, representing one of the highest volumes since the cessation of hostilities. No rockets were detected from north to south, but one interception of a projectile by the Israeli Defense Forces was observed by UNIFIL. Clashes between the IDF and Hezbollah have also been reported by our peacekeeping colleague. We continue to urge all sides to exercise restraint and uphold the agreed cessation of hostilities. We call on all actors to constructively engage through diplomatic channels to fully implement Resolution 1701. UNIFIL continues to face obstructions, including yesterday when the IDF blocked UNIFIL movements near Baida in Sector West, forcing one UN patrol to return to a nearby position. These conditions underscore the risks faced daily by our peacekeepers. Yesterday, a solemn ceremony was held at Beirut to honor a UNIFIL peacekeeper who died on Friday following critical injuries sustained in a projectile explosion at his base last month. The head of mission and force commander for UNIFIL, Diodato Abanyara, paid tribute to Indonesian Corporal Rico Pramudia, who was 31 years old. He recalled his dedication, his professionalism, and sacrifice in the service of peace. He is the fourth Indonesian peacekeeper to lose his life in southern Lebanon in less than a month. Major General Abanyara said, "You came here far from home to serve the UN flag, to bring peace to this land. Here in the south of Lebanon, you gave everything." And I add this is true of all peacekeepers who serve under the UN banner. Corporal Pramudia is survived by his wife and a young son. We send his family and the people and government of Indonesia our deep condolences. UN peacekeepers should never be targeted. On the humanitarian front, as you can imagine, the continued demolitions, shelling, and airstrikes continue to disrupt daily life for civilians, particularly in southern Lebanon, increasing uncertainty for many families about whether it is safe for them to return home. As of today, more than 115,000 displaced people remain in collective shelters across Lebanon. According to authorities, some 50,000 housing units were completely damaged, leaving tens of thousands of people without homes to return to, especially in southern Lebanon and in Beirut's southern suburbs. Although more than 140,000 people have been reached with psychosocial support and other protection, our partners say that women and girls continue to face heightened risks. Partners continue to reach people where and when they can, and as of today, our partners have distributed more than 7 million hot meals, nearly 100,000 meal boxes, as well as mattresses, hygiene kits to those who need them. Nearly 225,000 displaced people have received medical consultations. However, the response remains severely underfunded. The flash appeal for Lebanon is only about one-third funded, with just under $103 million in the bank. Turning south to the occupied Palestinian territory, our OCHA colleagues tell us that yesterday an aid worker was shot and killed in Gaza. Our partners from the NGO Ard El Insan, the aid worker was killed in his place of, next to his place of work during working hours. This NGO provides medical services with support from the Humanitarian Fund, which OCHA manages on behalf of the Humanitarian Coordinator. The NGO said it has suspended services while a security assessment is underway. As of last week, OCHA has recorded the killing of 589 aid workers in Gaza since October 2023. On a more positive note, our colleagues said that over the last week, partners leading on emergency shelter took about 34,000 mattresses, 19,500 blankets into Gaza for further distribution, and between 22nd of April and last Saturday, they delivered tarpaulins, plastic rolls, bedding kits, and clothes to more than 3,200 households. Over the past week, our partners leading on protection provided services to more than 20,000 people across Gaza. More than 10,000 of them were provided with mental health or psychosocial support, while other services, including case management, legal assistance, and support for people with disabilities. In the West Bank, our OCHA colleagues tell us that settler attacks against Palestinians continue, causing casualties, property damage, and displacement. Since the start of this year, and as of last Monday, about 680 settlers have been recorded, Israeli settler attacks have been recorded in over 200 Palestinian communities, resulting in the full displacement of 9 communities. Today, OCHA released a map that shows the impact of settler attacks on Palestinians between 2023 and 2025. That period recorded more than 4,500 settler attacks. that resulted in 50 Palestinians killed and over 4,600 injured, as well as more than 3,900 Palestinians displaced due to settler attacks and access restrictions. OCHA reiterates that Israel, as the occupying power, has an obligation to protect Palestinian population, conduct harming civilians should be assessed to determine whether violations have occurred. Perpetrators of violations must be held to account in line with international humanitarian law. Moving to Syria, I was asked over the weekend about the arrest of the former Syrian regime official Amjad Youssef, and I can tell you that our Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Claudio Cordone, has just concluded a visit to Syria, where, among other things, he engaged with the government regarding the arrest of Youssef, saying this is a significant moment of accountability for the country. We welcome all efforts and steps taken towards ensuring accountability of all those responsible for international crimes potentially committed in Syria, with a view to placing the victims and their families at the center of justice. We believe that transitional justice requires comprehensive strategy anchored in a legal framework aimed at achieving truth, accountability, reconciliation, reparations, and non-repetition. Affected communities must also have a genuine voice in shaping Syria's transitional justice strategy. The country has an opportunity to demonstrate that a new era will be defined by the rule of law. And you saw over the weekend that we issued a statement on Mali, a situation that the Secretary General continues to follow closely. In the statement, the Secretary General expressed his deep concern following the attacks in several locations across Mali. He strongly condemns the acts of violence, expresses solidarity with the Malian people, and stresses the need to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. The Secretary General calls for coordinated international support to address the evolving threat of violent extremism and terrorism in the Sahel and to meet urgent humanitarian needs. He reiterates his call for robust security coordination and collaboration across the region. On the humanitarian front, our humanitarian colleagues say the situation in the country remains severe, driven by escalating insecurity, blockades, and access constraints. Before this latest crisis, some 6.4 million human beings in Mali needed humanitarian aid, while 1.5 million of them faced acute food insecurity. Aid operations were already facing challenges arising from insecurity, fuel shortages, and disease outbreaks. The response is also critically underfunded, with $578 million of humanitarian needs and response plan only 13% funded, meaning $76 million is in the bank. Turning to Sudan, we join our colleagues at UNHCR in condemning an attack that hit an aid truck in North Darfur. On Friday, a UNHCR truck carrying emergency shelter kits came under attack by a drone while transiting through the town of Drisaya. The driver escaped unhurt, thankfully, but all of the supplies were destroyed in the fire. The truck was heading to Tawila, where 700,000 men, women, and children have sought safety after fighting in other parts of Sudan. UNHCR will continue to work in Sudan to reach displaced people, including 9 million displaced within the country's borders and more than 860,000 that have crossed the border to other countries. On Saturday, a drone reportedly caused casualties in residential neighborhoods in El Obeid city in North Kordofan. Local medical group Sudan Doctors Network said 7 people were killed and over 20 injured. These ordinary families in their homes caught in violence that continues to reach civilian neighborhoods. We condemn all of these attacks. We reiterate that civilian infrastructure must never be targeted, and civilians must never be targeted, and all parties must ensure rapid and unhindered humanitarian access. Elsewhere in Blue Nile, a recent assessment by our partners has revealed a worsening humanitarian situation across displacement sites, driven by overcrowding, the lack of privacy, inadequate shelter, poor sanitation, and escalating risks of gender-based violence, among others. The resident and humanitarian coordinator for Sudan, Denise Brown, visited Damazin, the capital of Blue Nile State, last week, highlighting how funding gaps, insecurity, and access constraints continue to limit the ability of aid organizations to scale up the response. Heading south to South Sudan, the peacekeeping mission there, UNMISS, tells us over the weekend that they responded to intercommunal violence, which had resulted in multiple deaths and injuries in the greater Tonj in Warrap state. and they responded by deploying peacekeepers to an area to help stabilize the situation. Tensions, however, remain high, and the mission had a quick reaction force on standby to deter further conflict. UNMISS is also engaging with community leaders and state authorities in an effort to restore calm. Separately, after several attempts due to access denials, the mission conducted an integrated two-day patrol to Khor Kaltan, Jebel Iraq, in central Equatorial State to assess the situation there following reports of deadly attacks on civilians in late March. The patrol team met with community representatives and security forces on the ground. Finally, an UNMISS-supported mobile court in Lear has conducted its work after hearing 68 civil and criminal cases across several counties in southern Unity State and in Bentiu IDP camp. This resulted in 31 criminal rulings with 18 convictions, with others acquitted or dismissed, and 29 people released from wrongful or prolonged detention. Such mobile justice interventions are part of the mission's ongoing efforts to strengthen the rule of law and access to justice throughout South Sudan. Staying in the region in Chad, I can tell you that we are following with concern the recent developments there, including reports of arrests of opposition figures. The importance of upholding human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression, association, peaceful assembly, in line with Chad's international human rights obligations, is critical. We call on the Chadian authorities to ensure due process and access to legal representation for all those detained. Meanwhile, we extend our condolences to the families and victims of intercommunal violence in Wadi Fira province over the weekend, which led to the death of scores of people. We encourage continued conflict prevention efforts to prevent further loss of lives in eastern Chad. And in the Central African Republic, our peacekeeping mission there welcomes the peaceful and orderly conduct of the second round of legislative and municipal elections this weekend. The mission continues to implement its mandate and support the organization of these elections. Today, colleagues are securely transporting the results in envelopes, polling station records, and equipment back to the capital, Bangui. As we mentioned, the mission provided multifaceted support to the authorities by transporting nearly 30 tons of equipment from Bangui to 23 locations outside the capital, as well as personnel from the National Election Authority. The mission also provided technical support and worked alongside the Central African Defense and Security Forces to implement the Integrated Election Security Plan. The head of the peacekeeping mission, Valentin Rugwabiza, welcomed the fact that the elections were held throughout the country, including in areas where voters were unable to cast their ballots last December due to the violence. A couple more notes. Moving to Europe and Ukraine, our colleagues in Ukraine, our humanitarian colleagues, tell us that over the past week, at least 3 drone strikes hit humanitarian vehicles in the city of Kherson. 2 incidents involved the same local NGO, while another impacted a different organization delivering food. Several aid workers were also injured. Across Ukraine, in the first 3 months of this year, at least 3 aid workers were killed and 5 were injured, according to our humanitarian partners. Our humanitarian colleagues also note that intensified hostilities over the weekend through this morning caused nearly 130 civilian casualties and widespread damage to civilian infrastructures in Dnipro and Odessa, among those most affected. The weekend's attacks also led to casualties and damages in the region of Kharkiv, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kyiv. UN partners are providing psychosocial support, hot meals, and repair materials alongside first responders. In frontline areas, civilians continue to be evacuated. This weekend, some 1,900 civilians, including more than 360 children, were evacuated from frontline areas in Donetsk with the support of humanitarian organizations and local authorities. Almost done. Heading to the Pacific. The Federated State of Micronesia. Regarding the Federated States of Micronesia, our OCHA colleagues tell us that we and our partners are supporting the government to help people in the aftermath of Super Typhoon Sinlaku, which caused catastrophic damage in parts of the country earlier this month. Our partners are providing food, clean water, hygiene support, and shelter supplies, among other life-saving assistance. We've deployed an expert team to help respond to the environmental damage. In Chuk, which is the most populous state in the country, 70% of the population, that's more than 34,000 people, were impacted by the typhoon. Nearly 3,000 homes there were damaged or destroyed. driving more than 4,200 people to seek shelter elsewhere. Access to communities in remote and outer islands is difficult, with limited and costly fuel adding to the challenge. We urgently need more funding to ensure that we and our partners can reach those impacted by this super typhoon. We have a quiz. This country is the world's 4th largest island. Sorry? Nope. Sorry? Nope. And if you enjoy vanilla ice cream.
Madagascar.
Yes, Noreen. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. That's what they all say. Because Madagascar is the world's top producer of vanilla, producing approximately 80% of the world's supply. Madagascar paid $127,158, and we thank them for every penny. Questions? No, because Chris is not here today. Noreen, do you yield? Okay. All right, Sherwin.
Steph, South Africa is today commemorating the 32nd anniversary of its first Freedom Day, which commemorates the first post-apartheid election held in 1994, which subsequently elected Nelson Mandela, and the day the new constitution was introduced 30 years ago. The theme is freedom and the rule of law. Given the UN's critical role in that transition and its own concerns about the implementation of international law and the rule of international law, what can you say about the ongoing relationship between the UN and South Africa?
First of all, we honor South Africa on celebrating the 32nd Freedom Day. South Africa is one of the world's great examples of what people can achieve together. The credit for the creation of the Rainbow Nation out of the darkness of the brutal and inhumane apartheid regime goes to the people of South Africa. I think since the democratic transition, as you mentioned, South Africa has been a critical partner of the United Nations, contributing actively to multilateral efforts to advance peace, to combat climate change, to development, and to human rights. And that partnership reflects a shared belief that progress is strongest when it is anchored in international cooperation, in the respect for international law, and the consistency in the pursuit of justice, equity, and human dignity. As you mentioned, I think that partnership has a history. I think we all recall the work that was done by the UN Special Committee on Apartheid, which for decades helps mobilize international awareness of the crimes being committed. It documented the realities, and it helped galvanize international support for a transition. And today's South Africa remains a powerful reminder that even the most entrenched systems of injustice can be overcome through collective resolve and principled multilateral action. Abdelhamid, and then Namo.
Thank you, Steph. First, are you aware that the refugee camp of Colombia is being under attack for the last 14 hours?
I had not seen that report, but we will look into it.
Okay, the second question. Since the genocide war started in Gaza, 1,800 children were arrested, as some of them as young as 10-year-old, and yet we haven't seen the reflection of this crime in the various reports of the United Nations.
I mean, I think those, the issue of the arrest of minors and the continued detention of minors in Israeli prisons has been raised a number of times by various human rights mechanisms and mentioned in Secretary General's reports. And we call on all of these minors to be released.
And lastly, when you say that we call on Israel, I mean the statement by OCHA, or that we call on Israel to protect the Palestinian civilians from the attacks of the settlers, doesn't look like this is a joke when the settlers are armed by the government, trained by the government, and they don't go to any attack without having the army with them to protect them. So you're calling on the same killer to protect the victims.
Israel has legal obligations. We have we have raised these issues directly with the government to uphold their obligations to protect Palestinians and to ensure that there is accountability. But this call for the respect of international law, whether it's in the occupied West Bank or anywhere else in the world, cannot be left on the shoulders of the Secretary General alone. Namo.
Thank you, Stéphane. Despite promises of linguistic and cultural rights by Syria's new authorities for Kurds, Damascus is reportedly moving to end the Kurdish language curriculum that has been used in the Kurdish majority areas administered by the Syrian Democratic Forces. How does the Secretary General view this? Would he oppose restrictions on mother tongue education for Kurds?
Look, I haven't seen those particular reports. We will look into it. But what we have said repeatedly about Syria is that Syria needs to be a country where all of its minorities, whether they're linguistic or religious, feel at home, feel protected, and are able to exercise both their language and their religions freely. Okay. Oh, yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you. This is Tao Xu with China Central Television. So after the U.S.-Iran talks failed to make progress over the weekend, is the Secretary General concerned about the further regional escalation?
Yeah, I mean, we continue to be concerned about the ongoing blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the lack of freedom of navigation. I think the Secretary General spoke very clearly and eloquently about that today. We did see that there were no face-to-face talks over the weekend, but we are aware that contacts through the very helpful mediation efforts of Pakistan are ongoing, and we hope that diplomacy will still get the upper hand over destruction. Okay, on that note, thank you all for coming. Hasta mañana.